Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to extend a word of thanks. Can you hear me? Right. Is it better now? Perfect, I think. I would like to extend a word of thanks to the fantastic organizers, Nika, Jenny, Christina, and everyone else that has been involved in organizing this fascinating symposium. Now, without much ado, I want to talk about German Cameroon, a period of more than 100 years back. And I have to warn in advance that I'm going to be calling some names in German that are going to sound strange to you. And the reason why these names are going to sound strange to you is because I'm going to be pronouncing the names with my African English accent. And it's not surprising if I tell you what my own name is, which is Njung. I wouldn't be surprised if nobody was able to pronounce the name here. Now, I like to start with sort of visualization, sort of present images so that you look at the images and then you can reflect on the text when I start the conversation. I'm told that I have to talk for 20 minutes. I intend to talk for 19 minutes and 59 seconds. So here I have the map first. You see, this is to my left. You have Cameroon, which used to be a German colony from 1884 to 1914, and then there's the First World War. And Cameroon is also a very beautiful country. You can see to the right the map of Africa, and you see that Cameroon sits right in the middle. It straddles, it was sort of sandwiched by British and French West African colonies. And of course, it's in Central Africa. And these are the figures whose names are going to sound strange. Jesko von Puttkamer would be the longest serving governor in German Cameroon from about 1885 to roughly 1907, I think for about 12 years. And you would also have Karl Zimmermann, who was the military commander in Cameroon when the German forces were battling the colony against the invasion of the British and French colonies. And of course, you have Karl Ebermeyer, who was the last serving German governor in Cameroon at the time. And here you have Hans Dominique. In fact, Cameroonians used to refer to Hans Dominique as the witch person, as the devil incarnate himself, because of the proportion of violence that he perpetrated in Cameroon. He was revered, he was feared by everybody. And now you have female prisoners of war that are dressed in nudity, that are naked, which was very commonplace in Cameroon at the time. And then you have an example of the operation of a 3.7 machine gun by the Schutztruppe. The Schutztruppe refers to the German Cameroon colonial soldiers. And then you also have a Schutztruppe company by one of the German lieutenants who is, participating. It's not just one, and sort of giving instructions to them, and they are shooting against the British and French troops or forces on the 9th of January 1915 in one of the mountainous hilly places. And I have an example here of a male survivor of violent flogging. It was very typical back in the days to flog African indigenous peoples or natives with a rhinoceros whip. And this is just one of the outcomes of such flogging. Now, I want to begin with a question, which is if you suddenly learn, as you are about to do, that one of Africa's first modern refugee crises happened not after independence from 1961 upward, but under empire, of which Germany was one of the major imperial powers. And with that question in mind, I sort of want to ask a few questions. Catch up right there. Now, with that question in mind, I want to give a set of focused questions that I'm going to be focusing on. The first one being that how colonial conquest primed Cameroon for mass displacement. The second one is how the First World War transformed civilians, Cameroonian civilians, into refugees. The third one is what does it mean when we look at the gender dimensions of flight, of labor, and of survival during the war in Cameroon? And the fourth one is what are the lasting legacies for migration, for memory, and for policy? Now, prelude. I want to talk about prelude to the main event that I want to talk about. The prelude is the period between 1884 up to 1914, when the First World War breaks out. So the prelude is, it begins with this fantastic but sort of unfortunate, as Cameroonians would come to know, story of the Germans colonizing Cameroon in 1884 via signing some treaties with the Douala chiefs. And the point, from that point that the Germans colonized Cameroon, Cameroonians never knew peace anymore. And immediately as the Germans colonized Cameroon, they began to sort of expand German colonialism into the interior, which was followed by a series of punitive raids on a number of coastal and interior people, with all sorts of atrocities happening. An example is 1893, whereby the Germans waged war against a particular ethnic group that is sort of led by King Benga, because he rejects German colonialism. But the Germans decide that they are going to force him and his people to accept colonialism. At the end of the day, his people are crushed and he is executed. But one of the main dramatic, very violent, graphically violent events happened in between 1910 to 1914, just before the outbreak of the First World War, whereby one of the major ethnic groups, Douala, which was a group that originally contracted a treaty of annexation with the Germans, decided that the Germans were violating the terms of the treaty. And King Rudolf Mangabell, who had actually made a trip here to Germany in Berlin, he sent his secretary to come to Berlin in 1911, 1912, to try to appeal to the Reichstag that against the policies that the Germans were implementing in Cameroon. And the German colonial administration charges him on charges of treason and decided to execute him, by public hanging under the watchful eyes of all the people. And it becomes like a very scary incident. But the real trouble begins, during 1914, where we have huge displacement and refuge seeking. Now, what happens in 1914, August, September 1914, is that the British and the French, deploy their West African soldiers who invade Cameroon to seize the colony from Germany. Now, the Germans' response would unleash a series of movements, of forced movements, and of violence, of agony, amongst the people. They would begin with what is known as a scorched earth policy or warfare kind of a type, in which they are virtually destroying almost everything. There is destruction of villages and crops. All of these things, Karl Ebermeyer and Karl Zimmermann, two of them who are the main protagonists, they classify all of these practices under the rubric of military necessity. And according to the Germans, military necessity meant that they had to do everything possible to win the war, even if that required or that involved killing civilians in order to win the war. And so what's happening around that time is that civilians are targeted. There is forced recruitment. By the way, people are just being conscripted into the German military contingency. There is public execution for those who refuse to be executed, or for people who are suspected of being friendly to the Allied powers. The Germans also create what is referred to as free war zones. There are free war zones in which they give an ultimatum to all civilians within a particular radius to evacuate. And when civilians don't evacuate, of course, we know what is likely going to follow thereafter. And of course, there is a gender dimension of displacement that is happening, whereby women are left behind as men are forced into war efforts as porters, as soldiers, and so on. There is sexual violence that is happening at a disproportionate and sort of lamentable rate. There is exploitation. There is hunger that is sort of shaping the desultory flight that is happening. Mothers are abandoning their children in mission stations. The German Baptist missionaries were very much present in Cameroon at this time. There were also the Presbyterian missions, and women are just abandoning their children there and fleeing for their own lives. There is family structures and kinship networks are permanently disrupted and upended. But one of the greatest forced migration that actually happens, it's what I would refer to as the Yaoundé evacuation that happens from about late 1915, December 1915, / about January 1916, whereby by December 1915, it becomes obvious to the Germans that they are losing the war. And so the Germans decide to activate Plan B. And Plan B is for the Germans to exit the territory as quickly as possible into the friendly neighboring colony, which is the Spanish Guinea, which is today known as Equatorial Guinea. Because at this point, Spain is neutral in the war. And so before the Germans decide to evacuate, they force everybody. Governor Karl Ebermeyer institutes an order forcing everybody from the northern part of Yaoundé to evacuate their homes, get their luggages on their head, and move on a caravan with the Germans. And people are forced to move a distance of about 200 miles to Spanish Guinea. Thousands die on the way. They die of hunger. They die of disease. They die of exhaustion. But of course, the aftermath, it doesn't just end there. Even when the Germans move to Spanish Guinea, as people move there and they're trying to get refuge, many people are denied entrance into Spanish Guinea. And initially, some of them are being forced back into the Cameroon colony, and they are fleeing from all these chaotic and fatal situations. And as they're coming back, they are being sort of crammed into refugee camps that are at this point being managed by the British and the French, who have expelled the Germans from Cameroon. And of course, some of the consequences are disease, death, they are rampant. Relief is minimal. Displacement is also seen as a labor relief, whereby people are forced into labor camps and so on. The social fabric is upended. Villages are destroyed. Ethnic boundaries are redrawn. Now, I've been talking too much, as I realize. But what are the key takeaways? What is it that I want you to take away from this conversation? The first key point that I want you to take away is that displacement was not policy. Displacement was policy. It was German deliberate policy during the war in Cameroon. It was not accidental. That's important. The second key thing I want you to take away is that Cameroon's crisis, refugee crisis, predates modern refugee crisis. And this is important because scholarship on refugees has often tended to dehistoricize refugees and talk about refugees as if they're just sort of falling somewhere from space. The third thing that I would like you to take away is that a gender lens of sort of trying to articulate and understand these events reveals unique experiences of women, men, and children. And my larger argument, which I sort of has expatiated upon within my ancillary research, is that when we sort of study refugee and migration movements from a gender lens, we're able to sort of understand the differential ways in which men and women experience such agony or such adversity in their lives. The last point that I want you to take away is that colonial violence left generational scars that have come to shape even modern-day resistance in Africa. Now, I want to conclude this way. Now, I did say that I was going to talk for 19 minutes and 59 seconds. It looks like I beat my own record because I will be done in the next 1 or 2 minutes. Now, here's the conclusion. I frame my conclusion in terms of why all of this matters. Why am I talking about all of this? So the first thing is that I'm talking about all of this because I need the German public to be informed. You would be surprised that very few people know or even remember that Cameroon was a German colony. And it is commonplace everywhere, even in Africa. I've been in West Africa. I'm on sabbatical research. Ghana, Benin, Togo, Nigeria. Most people see me and I speak English, and when I say I come from Cameroon, they're like, you're lying. I'm like, I come from Cameroon. Because people just think that Cameroon has always been a French colony. They don't even know that it was a German colony. The first reason why it matters is that this conversation connects past displacement to present-day refugee politics. The way that we talk about refugees today, we need to understand the history of refugees and the involvement and the ways in which empire building orchestrated mass and forced movements. And then the third point is that this conversation challenges Eurocentric war memory and it recenters Africa within the conversation. The fourth point is that this informs migration policy by showing deep historical roots. So I come from the US, and oftentimes when those politicians in the US talk about refugees, they talk about refugees as if they are just creeping everywhere from Africa and other places, right? And as if refugees don't have a history. And we get this kind of conversation, even from the UK and of course in many other places. I don't want to say Germany because I don't want to stay back here instead of going back to West Africa. And then the last point is that this conversation calls for recovery of erased refugee narratives, the ways in which refugee stories are told. We sort of need to be able to understand this root of refugees in able to sort of put ourselves back into the conversation. Now I would say thank you very much for your attention.